The room was filled with a hum of voices, but when he stepped into it, a sudden silence took over. A palpable tension hung in the air, thick like smoke that choked out everything else. It wasn't just that the room had gone quiet, he could feel it. Every eye was trained on him. The weight of their gazes, sharp and heavy, felt like 1,000 needles digging into his skin. This was it. The moment he had been dreading for months had arrived. Nasher had never been the one to stand out. In fact, he preferred to fade into the background. But sometimes, the world has a way of forcing you into the spotlight, and no matter how much you try to escape, you find yourself right in the middle of it all. This time, it wasn't just bad luck. It was deliberate. The whispers, the taunts, the cold stares, all of it had led to this singular moment. "Play it," the voice came from the back of the room, smug and dripping with mockery. The voice of Kyle, one of the school's most notorious bullies, sent a wave of nausea rushing through Nasher's body. He was standing there now, guitar in hand, the strings cold under his fingers. They had picked the instrument, an instrument he had no real connection to, no skill in playing. It was perfect for their little game. "Play it," Kyle repeated, his voice more demanding now. "Play the guitar, Nasher. We'll see how you embarrass yourself this time." The other students laughed. It wasn't just a laugh. It was a sound that pierced through his very being, each chuckle adding weight to the invisible chains that bound him. The mockery was loud, invasive, but even louder than that was the pressure. The pressure to conform. The pressure to not fail. The pressure to be something he wasn't. Nasher stood there, frozen. His fingers trembled, the cold sweat forming on his palms making it difficult to hold the guitar. His mind raced. He wanted to turn around and run. He wanted to scream at them all to stop, to leave him alone. But there was no way out. They had cornered him, and the only way to survive this was to play along, literally. His heart beat in his chest, echoing so loudly in his ears that it almost drowned out the laughter. Almost. The walls of the room seemed to close in on him, shrinking with every passing second. How had it come to this? How had he gone from being an ordinary student, trying to survive high school, to being the focus of such intense ridicule? Nasher's gaze flickered around the room. They were waiting for him to fail. Waiting for him to embarrass himself. They had always expected him to be weak. That's what they saw in him, someone who wouldn't stand up for himself, someone who was just a shadow. And they were right, to a degree. Nasher had never been the type to fight back. He wasn't one to get involved in conflicts, to raise his voice, or to challenge the people who made his life hell. But today, as the guitar sat awkwardly in his hands, a thought crept into his mind, maybe today could be different. His fingers tightened on the neck of the guitar, the wood warm against his skin despite the chill in the room. He wasn't good at this. He had tried once, long ago, to pick up the instrument. It had been a fleeting interest, one that had burned out before it even began. But here he was now, forced to play in front of an audience that wasn't there to hear music, they were there to witness his failure. With a deep breath, Nasher strummed the strings. The sound was weak, the chord far from perfect. It felt foreign, like his hands didn't belong on the instrument at all. He couldn't even remember the last time he had picked up a guitar, and yet, here he was, playing like his life depended on it. The laughter didn't stop. If anything, it grew louder. But then, something strange happened. Something unexpected. The next chord he played, though shaky, sounded different. It felt different. Nasher wasn't sure if it was the pressure of the moment or the sheer force of will, but something inside him clicked. The trembling stopped, if only for a second. His fingers, though clumsy, began to find their way across the strings, guided by a force he didn't understand. Another chord, this time louder, clearer. A pause. Then another. The tension in his body seemed to ease as the music, however imperfect, took over. It was as if the guitar had a life of its own, drawing out something from within him that he never knew existed. The rhythm began to grow, and so did the sound. The room fell silent again, but this time, it was different. They were no longer laughing. No longer mocking. The sound of the guitar, raw and unpolished, filled the space between them, and something shifted. The silence stretched on, stretching the moment out of time. Nasher could feel it. This was no longer just a performance. It was a statement. It was his voice, speaking louder than the cruelty that had pushed him into this situation. He closed his eyes, feeling the strings beneath his fingertips. With every strum, he poured something into the music. Something real. Something powerful. The guitar had become his escape, his way of surviving this hellish moment. The mocking voices from earlier faded, and for a brief instant, it was just him and the music. The room remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. Then came the twist. He reached the end of the song, his fingers stiff from the effort, his body soaked in sweat. The room held its breath. Nasher slowly opened his eyes, searching the sea of faces before him. The audience was different now. They were no longer just mocking him, their expressions had changed. There was something else in their eyes. Shock. Awe. Wonder. It was hard to tell. But there was no denying it, he had caught them off guard. But then, as quickly as the silence had fallen, it was shattered. A voice from the back of the room cut through the stillness. "You're not who we thought you were," it said, soft but unmistakably loud enough for everyone to hear. The words landed like a bomb. Nasher's heart skipped a beat. What did that mean? The tension returned, only this time it was heavier, loaded with 1,000 unanswered questions. The crowd was still, as if they didn't know what to do with the unexpected turn of events. Was this how it was going to end? Had they really seen him in a new light? Nasher didn't know how to answer, didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure what had just happened, or what this moment meant for him. But he could feel it, the shift, the change, the sense that something had just begun. Before he could react, Kyle's voice rang out again, cutting through the air like a blade. "You think that changes anything? You think that performance makes you someone else?" Nasher didn't respond. What could he say? The truth was, he wasn't sure who he was anymore, and the words Kyle had just spoken only made the uncertainty more real. But Nasher knew one thing for certain, this moment was far from over. The performance had been his first step, but it had opened a door to something he wasn't prepared for. The journey ahead would be unpredictable, full of twists and turns he couldn't have foreseen. And whatever lay beyond this moment, Nasher had a feeling he was about to discover a side of himself he never knew existed. As he walked off the stage, his mind raced. What had just happened? Who had he become in their eyes? And more importantly, who was he becoming? The answers weren't clear. Not yet. But one thing was certain, he was no longer the person they thought he was. The next few days felt like a blur to Nasher. He had returned home that evening with a mixture of relief and confusion. The performance was over, and the crowd's reactions had been far from what he'd expected. For once, it wasn't the laughter, the jeering, or the snide comments. The silence that followed his final chord, followed by the strange words from the back of the room, "You're not who we thought you were," had left him feeling more unsettled than ever. What had happened? Why had everything changed in that one moment? For years, Nasher had been the invisible one, the quiet, unassuming kid who tried his best to blend into the background. The one who sat in the back of the classroom, hoping the attention wouldn't fall on him. His life had been a series of small moments of survival, navigating high school without getting caught up in anything too big, too dangerous. He had never wanted to stand out. But now, standing on the edge of something he didn't understand, the idea of fitting in felt like a distant memory. The next morning, he woke up to the usual barrage of notifications on his phone. Texts, group messages, notifications from social media, everyone had seen the video. Of course, it had been recorded. Every embarrassing moment in school was caught on camera, shared and reshared until it became a part of the public narrative. He hadn't thought much of it at first, assuming it would be just another viral moment that would fade away. But when he clicked on the link to the video, he realized it was different. The comments were full of praise, astonishment, and confusion. Did he really play that well? I thought he was just some quiet kid who kept to himself. This changes everything. The more Nasher read, the more his chest tightened. He couldn't understand it. Why were they all so shocked? It wasn't as if he had done something incredible. He had simply played a song that was imperfect, raw, and emotional, but nothing groundbreaking. So why had it made such an impact? The next day at school, things were even more strange. When he walked into the hallway, the usual silence of avoidance had been replaced with curious glances and subtle nods. People who had never spoken to him were now acknowledging his presence. They didn't say anything directly, but the looks, they said it all. As he walked to his locker, a familiar voice called out. "Hey, Nasher, right?" It was Sarah, a girl he barely knew. She was one of the more popular students, always surrounded by her friends, always laughing, always in control. She was the type of person who had everything figured out. So when she approached him, he felt a little out of place, unsure how to respond. Yeah, he said, trying not to stammer. "I saw your performance the other day," she said, smiling. "That was really something. You're way better than I thought you'd be." Nasher wasn't sure how to react. Part of him wanted to brush it off, but another part of him felt strangely elated, as if the compliment had peeled away something hidden beneath the surface. "Thanks," he muttered, unsure what else to say. Sarah continued, "We're actually planning a talent showcase next month. You should totally be in it. You could be the headliner, you know. You've got a real gift." The word headliner seemed surreal, like it didn't belong in the same sentence as his name. Nasher had never been the headliner of anything. He was the kid who got picked last in gym class, the one who no one noticed, the one who blended into the background. But now, here he was, being asked to perform in front of the whole school. Part of him wanted to say no. He wasn't ready for that. He didn't want to be thrust into the spotlight again. But another part of him, one that had awoken during that brief, trembling performance on stage, felt a flicker of excitement. What if he could do more? What if he could become someone other than the quiet, invisible Nasher? "Maybe," he said, trying to play it cool. "I'll think about it." As the day went on, more students approached him with similar sentiments. Some asked if he was planning to perform again. Others commented on how real his music had felt. It was overwhelming. But it wasn't just praise that was building. It was something else, something that Nasher didn't quite understand. A certain kind of expectation. That afternoon, after school, Nasher found himself wandering to the old music room. It had always been a place of refuge for him. A quiet space, tucked away from the chaos of the hallways, where the noise couldn't touch him. It was where he had first picked up the guitar years ago, on a whim, hoping to learn something new. Now, standing in front of the dusty instruments, Nasher wasn't sure what he was looking for. But his fingers seemed to move instinctively. They reached for the guitar, and before he knew it, he was strumming again. This time, though, something was different. The music came more naturally, as if the instrument was speaking to him, pulling something from deep inside. As he played, the memory of the performance from days earlier came flooding back. The silence of the room. The look on the faces of the crowd. The strange words that had been whispered afterward. "You're not who we thought you were." What did that mean? Who were they expecting him to be? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden noise. A door creaked open, and he turned to see a familiar figure stepping into the room. It was Kyle, the same guy who had been the loudest in mocking him just days before. Nasher tensed, but Kyle didn't speak immediately. Instead, he stood there, watching Nasher for a long moment, his expression unreadable. "Hey," Kyle said finally, breaking the silence. "That was something. I didn't expect it." Nasher didn't know how to respond. He was still processing the unexpected shift in the air around him. Kyle, of all people, was being civil? No, more than that. He was acknowledging Nasher's performance in a way that wasn't taunting. "I didn't think you had it in you," Kyle continued, his voice still low but not mocking. "I thought you were just another quiet kid. But that was different." Nasher couldn't help but feel a flicker of confusion. Was Kyle being genuine? Was this an apology? Or was it just another form of manipulation? He wasn't sure, but one thing was clear: everything was changing, and he was caught in the middle of it. Before he could answer, Kyle turned to leave, but not before adding one more thing. "You know, this isn't over. Whatever happened with you up there, this thing between us, it's not done yet. You've got people talking. And when people start talking, things get complicated." As Kyle walked away, Nasher stood frozen, the guitar still in his hands. What did Kyle mean by that? What was he hinting at? Nasher felt the weight of the question press down on him, heavier than ever. But there was something else, something darker, gnawing at the back of his mind. If people were talking, what were they really saying? What did they see in him now? He didn't know the answers, but as he walked out of the music room, one thing was for sure: this was only the beginning. The next few days were a blur of activity. Nasher couldn't remember the last time he had felt so overwhelmed by a single moment. What had started as a forced performance to silence the bullies had quickly turned into something much larger, something he wasn't sure he was ready for. The whispers, the texts, the random encounters in the hallways, it was all too much. Everyone was watching him now. It felt like his life had turned into a reality show that he hadn't signed up for, and he was the unwitting star of it all. The attention was suffocating. When he walked into the cafeteria the next day, the usual murmur of chatter fell silent. It wasn't out of malice or mocking, but rather a shift in energy. The stares weren't cruel, they were full of curiosity, uncertainty, maybe even admiration. But that only made it worse. It wasn't the same as the usual ridicule he had gotten used to. This was something different. It was almost too much. "Hey, Nasher." A voice called from behind him. It was Sarah again. She had become one of the few people who was constantly approaching him with kind words, almost as though she was trying to ensure he didn't fall back into the shadows. Nasher turned, offering a hesitant smile. "Hey. You're looking good," she said with a grin. "I saw some of the photos from your performance. You've got fans now. You should be proud." He chuckled nervously. "I'm not sure about that." "Oh, trust me. You're the talk of the school. Everyone's talking about it." And she wasn't lying. Everywhere he went, there were whispers about the performance. The way he had taken the guitar and played without hesitation, how he had risen above the cruel expectations. For the first time, Nasher was being seen. But it wasn't the way he had imagined. He wasn't sure if it was a blessing or a curse. As the day wore on, it became clear: the spotlight was now his. It wasn't something he had sought, but it had found him regardless. His phone buzzed with notifications, people tagging him in posts, others sharing the video, some even commenting on how they couldn't believe how much talent he had. It was strange. He wasn't used to being noticed for something good, not for anything other than being the quiet kid. But with this new visibility came new expectations. And those expectations were starting to feel like a weight on his shoulders. That evening, Nasher found himself sitting in his room, scrolling through social media. His hands fumbled with the phone, hesitating as he came across more and more comments on his performance. Each one was a reminder of the spotlight he hadn't asked for, but now couldn't escape. Nasher's gonna be famous. Just wait and see. I never thought he had it in him. Dude's a genius. Can't believe he pulled that off. So proud of him. The comments were mostly positive. But with every word of praise, Nasher felt a little more trapped. The pressure to live up to this newfound reputation was unbearable. What if he couldn't do it again? What if the next performance was a failure? What if people realized he wasn't what they thought he was? It was too much to process. He tossed the phone aside and laid back on his bed, staring up at the ceiling. For a brief moment, he wished he could go back to being invisible, to the days when no one had expectations of him, when he didn't have to worry about letting anyone down. But he knew that wasn't possible anymore. There was no turning back. That night, the weight of the world seemed to settle on his chest. He hadn't asked for this, but now he was in the middle of it all. He had to find a way to navigate it. And that meant figuring out who he was, really was, without the pressure of everyone else's perceptions. The next morning, Nasher was jolted awake by a phone call. He groggily answered, his voice thick with sleep. "Hello? Nasher, it's Sarah," came the cheerful voice on the other end. "I know this is last minute, but there's a meeting after school today. We're finalizing the lineup for the talent showcase, and we need you there to confirm your performance." Nasher's heart sank. The talent showcase was now a reality. It wasn't just a suggestion anymore, it was happening, and he was expected to be part of it. He had avoided committing to anything in the past few days, hoping it would all blow over, hoping he could fade back into the shadows. But there was no escaping it now. I don't know, Sarah," he stammered. "I don't think I'm ready." She paused, her tone turning slightly more serious. "Nasher, look, I get it. I know this is a lot. But you have something special. People believe in you. And you should believe in yourself, too." Her words stung. People believed in him? Why? Because he had managed to survive the mockery and play a song? Because for a brief moment, the guitar had become his shield? "I don't know," he repeated, but this time, there was a faint trace of doubt in his voice. Maybe he did have something to prove. Maybe he was capable of more than he realized. Sarah didn't push him any further, but her words lingered in his mind as he hung up the phone. She was right about one thing, he had something. But what if it wasn't enough? The rest of the day passed in a daze. Every time he tried to focus, his mind wandered back to the upcoming performance. What if it was a mistake? What if he let everyone down? The doubts crept in, clawing at him until he could hardly breathe. But when the final bell rang, signaling the end of the school day, Nasher found himself walking to the auditorium without even thinking about it. There was no escaping this now. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. Several students were already gathered, some nervously pacing, others sitting quietly, waiting for their turn. Nasher could feel the pressure mounting. As he entered the room, everyone was talking about him, about his performance. Some were even asking him if he was going to do it again, if he was going to bring that same energy. Nasher couldn't help but feel like he was about to let them all down. He was out of his element. He wasn't a performer. He wasn't a star. He was just a kid who had picked up a guitar in desperation and found himself unexpectedly good at it. But that didn't make him a performer. That didn't make him a professional. The meeting started, and the school's music teacher, Mrs. Walker, began going over the lineup. When it was Nasher's turn to confirm, she looked at him expectantly, waiting for him to say something. Yeah, he said, his voice shaky. "I'll do it." The words felt foreign coming out of his mouth. They felt like a commitment to something bigger than he was ready for. But there was no turning back. As Mrs. Walker smiled and jotted his name down on the list, Nasher's stomach twisted. He wasn't ready. But he didn't know how to say that without disappointing everyone. And as the day drew to a close, the realization hit him with full force: the spotlight wasn't going to fade. It wasn't going anywhere. He was the one who had to face it now. The question was, could he rise to the occasion? Could he survive what was coming next? The weight of the expectation seemed heavier than ever as Nasher walked out of the auditorium. He wasn't just a kid anymore. He was someone. But who? And more importantly, what would happen when they discovered who he really was? The days leading up to the talent showcase felt like an eternity. Nasher's every waking moment was consumed by the looming performance. It wasn't just the pressure of having to play in front of the entire school, it was the weight of the expectations, the pressure to live up to something he wasn't sure he could deliver. He had stumbled onto something by accident, an ability, a hidden talent, but now it felt like everyone was watching him, waiting for him to fail. The truth was, Nasher was terrified. Terrified that the next time he picked up his guitar, the magic would be gone. Terrified that everyone would realize he wasn't special, he wasn't some kind of musical genius. He was just a kid who got lucky. "Are you sure you're okay?" Sarah's voice cut through his thoughts as they walked to the music room together after school. "You've been looking like you're about to pass out every time I see you. You've got this, Nasher." He gave her a tight smile, trying to mask his anxiety. "Yeah, just nervous, you know." She nodded sympathetically. "I get it. But you can do this. You're not the same guy I met last week. You've got this whole new thing going on now, and you need to embrace it. You're not invisible anymore." Nasher couldn't help but feel a twinge of discomfort at her words. Not invisible anymore. It was true, but it was also terrifying. The life he had known, the one where he blended into the background, unnoticed, unimportant, was gone. And now, every time he turned around, people were looking at him. He could feel their eyes on him in the hallways, in the cafeteria, even when he was walking home from school. The worst part wasn't that people noticed him. The worst part was that he didn't know who he was anymore. He wasn't the quiet, unassuming Nasher who kept to himself, hiding away from the world. He wasn't sure if he was someone who could handle the attention, or if he had just been a fluke that would fade back into nothingness once the performance was over. "I don't know," Nasher muttered, more to himself than to Sarah. "What if I'm not good enough? What if they realize I'm just pretending?" Sarah didn't say anything at first, but then she stopped walking and turned to face him, a serious expression on her face. "You're not pretending, Nasher. You were real up there on that stage. You were raw, vulnerable. People don't see that every day. They saw you. The real you." The word stung, but in a good way. It was as if she had reached inside him and pulled out something he didn't even know existed. But the fear, the doubt, still clung to him like a second skin. Could he really do it again? Could he really stand up there and give another performance that would move people the way the first one had? Or had that been a fluke? A one-time thing that would never be repeated? That evening, Nasher sat in his room, guitar in hand, his fingers hovering over the strings. The same guitar he had used for the performance. The same guitar that had somehow become a symbol of his identity, a symbol he didn't know how to hold on to. He had spent the last few days trying to practice, trying to perfect the song he was going to play at the showcase. But nothing felt right. The chords were wrong, his fingers kept slipping, and the music just didn't come out the way it had that first time. That raw, emotional performance he had pulled off, where had that magic gone? Why did it feel so distant now? Nasher paused, staring down at the instrument. He could hear the echoes of the crowd's reaction in his mind. The silence that followed his final chord. The shock in their eyes. The words from the back of the room, "You're not who we thought you were." But now, as he sat there alone, the guitar felt like a stranger in his hands. How could something that had once brought him so much comfort now feel like such a burden? He strummed a few tentative notes, and a sigh escaped his lips. He wasn't ready. He wasn't prepared for this kind of pressure. He wasn't ready to stand in front of an audience, facing their expectations, their judgments. What if he failed? What if it wasn't enough? The thought of stepping onto that stage again was enough to make him want to run and hide. But he knew that he couldn't. He had already committed. He had already said yes. The performance wasn't just for them, it was for himself too. It was a chance to prove something, not just to the world, but to himself. Nasher's eyes wandered over to the small mirror across from him. He stared at his reflection for a long moment, as if searching for answers in the eyes that stared back at him. Who was he now? What had that performance really meant? The sound of his phone buzzing interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the screen, surprised to see a message from Kyle. "Hey man, I saw your video. You weren't bad." Nasher frowned. Kyle? The same Kyle who had spent months mocking him? The same Kyle who had been one of the loudest voices in the crowd that had taunted him every day? Why was he reaching out now? He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to ignore the message entirely, but another part of him was curious. He tapped out a response, trying to keep it neutral. "Thanks, I guess." A few seconds later, the reply came. "No, seriously. I don't know if you're still gonna perform or not, but if you do, just don't let the crowd mess with your head. You've got something. Don't let it go to waste." Nasher stared at the message, feeling a strange sense of confusion wash over him. Kyle, the guy who had made his life miserable for so long, was now giving him advice? Was this some kind of joke? Before he could respond, another message came. "I know I've been a jerk. I get it if you don't want to talk. But I'm telling you, man, you've got something. Don't waste it." Nasher's heart pounded in his chest. Was this real? Was Kyle actually being sincere? Or was this just another form of manipulation, another way of mocking him from afar? But as he stared at the screen, he couldn't ignore the reality of the situation. People were talking about him. People were seeing something in him that he didn't even see in himself. It was overwhelming, and yet, there was something about Kyle's words that resonated with him. Don't waste it. He didn't know if he could live up to whatever expectations people had for him. But maybe, just maybe, this wasn't about meeting anyone else's expectations. Maybe it was about meeting his own. With that thought in mind, Nasher made a decision. He wasn't going to let fear control him. He wasn't going to let the doubt hold him back. He wasn't going to be the invisible kid anymore. He wasn't going to hide behind the curtain of self-doubt. The next day at school, things felt different. The weight of what he was about to do was still heavy, but there was a sense of determination in him now. He had a purpose. He wasn't going to let this moment slip through his fingers. He was going to take control of it. When Sarah approached him in the hallway before the showcase, she could see it in his eyes. "You ready?" she asked, her voice full of optimism. Nasher took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah. I think I am." The auditorium was packed when he walked inside. The lights were dimmed, the stage set, and the atmosphere was electric. His heart raced as he made his way backstage, where the other performers were gathered. Some were calm, others were visibly nervous. But Nasher could feel the eyes of everyone on him. He was the one they were all talking about, the one who had gone from invisible to the center of attention in the blink of an eye. As he stood there, waiting for his turn, the minutes felt like hours. His mind wandered back to that first performance, the one where he had been forced to play, the one that had changed everything. Could he do it again? Could he make them feel what they had felt before? When his name was finally called, he stepped onto the stage, guitar in hand. The lights hit him immediately, blinding him for a moment. But then, the crowd's voices faded away, and all he could hear was the beating of his own heart. This was it. This was his moment. Nasher closed his eyes for a brief second, took a deep breath, and began to play. The crowd's chatter buzzed in his ears like the hum of an approaching storm. Nasher stood backstage, his guitar held tightly in his hands, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. Every beat echoed the fear and anticipation that swelled inside him. This was it, the moment that would define him. He had only ever been in the spotlight once before, and that had been a fluke. The performance that had unexpectedly made him the center of attention had been raw, imperfect, and emotional, but now, standing backstage with the weight of the world on his shoulders, Nasher realized that nothing about the second time would feel the same. The school had gathered in the auditorium for the annual talent showcase. The air inside was thick with excitement, a mixture of energy and nervousness that made it feel as though the walls were vibrating with every breath. Nasher could hear the laughter and voices from the crowd as they chatted in anticipation of the performances, but his mind was elsewhere, lost in his own fear. The first performance had been unexpected. He hadn't planned it, hadn't prepared for it, and yet somehow it had worked. The guitar had been a lifeline, something to hold on to in the face of ridicule, something that allowed him to stand tall for just a moment in the middle of all the judgment. But now, with people expecting more, with the pressure mounting, the guitar felt like an anchor instead of a savior. How could he do it again? Could he recreate the magic? "You're up, Nasher." Sarah's voice was like a lifeline, pulling him back from the spiraling thoughts that had taken hold of him. She was standing at the edge of the backstage area, a supportive smile on her face, but even that couldn't fully mask the nervous energy she was giving off. Nasher looked at her, trying to smile back. But it felt more like a grimace. "I don't know if I can do this, Sarah." Her smile faltered for just a second, but she quickly recovered. "You are doing this. You've already done it once. Now, you just have to believe that it wasn't a fluke. You belong here." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But the doubt was overwhelming. The fear was suffocating. The thought of stepping out onto that stage again felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, with nothing to hold onto but the promise of something he couldn't see. "I don't know if I'm ready for this," he whispered, his voice shaky. "What if I mess up? What if it's not good enough?" Sarah stepped closer, her eyes filled with compassion. "Nasher, listen to me. This isn't about being good enough. It's about being real. It's about letting people see who you are. And that's something no one else can do but you." Her words hit him in the chest. She was right. The first time had been real. It hadn't been perfect, but it had been true to who he was in that moment. He wasn't trying to be anyone else. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. It was the rawness of the performance that had connected with people. The truth in the music. But now, standing in the shadows, Nasher didn't know how to access that truth again. He had been caught up in his own doubts, in his own fear of failure, and the weight of expectation was heavy. How could he make people feel what he had felt the first time? How could he repeat that? Sarah didn't wait for him to answer. She placed a hand on his shoulder, squeezing gently. "You've got this. Trust yourself. You are enough." With a deep breath, Nasher nodded. "Okay," he muttered. "Okay. I'll do it." The walk to the stage felt like a slow-motion nightmare. Every step felt as though it took longer than the last, and every inch of the floor seemed to stretch beneath his feet. The lights hit him the moment he stepped into the spotlight. For a brief, disorienting moment, he couldn't see the audience. All he could see were the bright lights, blinding and overwhelming. But the sounds of the crowd reached him, laughter, hushed whispers, and that ever-present buzz of anticipation. Nasher stood still for a moment, closing his eyes to block out the world. He wasn't sure what he was about to do. He wasn't sure how to handle the pressure. But when his fingers touched the strings, everything fell away. The weight of expectation, the fear of failure, it all vanished. He began to play. The first chord was hesitant, unsure, but then it grew, and he found his rhythm. The music flowed from his fingers, the notes familiar, but somehow different this time. It felt like he was reaching deeper into himself, pulling something out that he hadn't known was there. It was a battle, one between the fear of failure and the desire to connect with something greater. And slowly, as he played, the fear began to subside. The music was no longer a burden, it became his voice, his way of telling the world who he was. The audience's reaction was immediate. They were silent at first, listening intently, caught up in the emotion of the performance. It wasn't flawless, there were moments where his fingers stumbled, where the music faltered, but in those imperfections, there was something human, something real. The crowd could feel it, too. They could feel the vulnerability, the struggle, the authenticity of the performance. Nasher's breath grew steadier as he played, his heart finding a new rhythm in the music. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to be perfect. He was just there. Just playing. When he reached the final note, he closed his eyes, allowing the music to linger for a moment longer before letting it fade away. He wasn't sure if it had been good or bad. He wasn't sure if he had met anyone's expectations. But he had done it. He had stepped up, and he had let himself be seen. That, in itself, was enough. The silence in the room stretched out for what felt like an eternity, and then, applause. Slow at first, tentative, but then growing louder and louder. Nasher opened his eyes to see the faces in the crowd, some of them stunned, some of them smiling, others clapping enthusiastically. He wasn't sure what to make of it. It was so much more than he had expected. But amidst the applause, there was one voice that stood out above the rest. From the back of the room, Kyle's voice rang out, loud and clear. "That's it, man!" Kyle shouted, his voice full of excitement. "You've got it. That's what we were waiting for." The crowd seemed to react to Kyle's enthusiasm, and Nasher felt a rush of something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just relief, it was validation. For the first time, he felt like he had done something that mattered. Like he had earned the applause. But as the applause continued, Nasher couldn't help but feel a new kind of pressure rising within him. What came next? What was he supposed to do now that people were looking at him? How could he live up to their expectations? Could he keep doing this? Could he keep being real? The answer didn't come right away. But as the crowd continued to cheer, Nasher felt a flicker of something inside him, something that felt like the first spark of hope. Maybe he didn't have all the answers. Maybe he didn't know what came next. But for the first time in his life, he realized that he didn't have to be perfect. He didn't have to meet anyone's expectations. He just had to be himself. And that, for him, was enough. As Nasher walked off the stage, his heart still racing, he caught Sarah's eye. She was standing near the side of the stage, her face lit up with pride. She gave him a thumbs up, and Nasher couldn't help but smile back. "I told you," she said softly as he approached her. "You did it. You were amazing." He nodded, still trying to catch his breath. "I wasn't sure I could. But I don't know, it just felt right." "Exactly," she said. "You stopped worrying about being perfect and just let it flow. That's the secret." Nasher didn't say anything more. He wasn't sure what the future held, but for now, in this moment, he had found something he had been searching for. He had found his voice. The days following the talent showcase were a whirlwind. Nasher had barely been able to keep up with the constant stream of attention, congratulations, and the influx of messages from people he hadn't spoken to in years. The video of his performance had gone viral within the school, and soon after, it spread to social media. It wasn't just his schoolmates who were talking about him now, it was people from other schools, and even a few teachers, who were impressed by what he had done. The change was almost surreal. Where he had once been invisible, now he was at the center of conversations. The spotlight was brighter than he ever imagined, and the expectations, once heavy and suffocating, had become a part of his new reality. At first, he had felt overwhelmed by it all. But now, something had shifted in him. He wasn't afraid of the attention anymore. Instead, he was learning to own it. Still, there was something he hadn't quite figured out. Beneath the praise, beneath the newfound recognition, Nasher couldn't shake the nagging feeling that he was still hiding from something deeper, something within himself. The performance, the accolades, it was all a part of the transformation, but was that transformation really who he was? Was he the person everyone saw on that stage, or was he still the quiet, uncertain kid who had never quite known how to be himself? He found himself wandering the school hallways, his thoughts heavy. Each passing day brought with it a new level of discomfort, new questions that he hadn't known how to answer. Even though people were now treating him differently, he wasn't sure he understood who he was becoming. What had all of this meant? Was it just a fleeting moment, a phase, or was it something more? As he walked to his locker, his gaze landed on the flyer that had been posted on the bulletin board. It was for another talent competition, this time a larger, citywide event. It was a huge opportunity, one that could open doors for him if he chose to pursue it. But Nasher felt an unease settle in his stomach. Another competition? Another stage? Was he ready for that kind of commitment? His fingers hesitated over the lock of his locker, his mind racing. On one hand, the opportunity was incredible. It could launch him into something he had never dreamed of, maybe even a career in music. On the other hand, it was a choice that felt too big, too overwhelming. He was snapped out of his thoughts when Sarah approached, her face bright with excitement. "Nasher, did you see the flyer for the competition? This could be your big break." Nasher forced a smile, but the unease didn't leave him. "Yeah, I saw it. It's a huge deal." "Of course it is. This is your moment, Nasher. People are still talking about your performance. You've got to take this chance." Her enthusiasm was palpable, but it didn't settle the doubt that churned inside him. He had already taken a huge step by performing at the talent showcase. Now, it felt like the stakes were being raised higher, and he wasn't sure if he could meet them. "I don't know, Sarah. I'm not sure I'm ready for all of this." Her expression softened. "I get it. It's a lot to take in. But you're ready, Nasher. You've proven that already. You've got something people want to see." Her words, though supportive, only made his internal conflict worse. Was he really ready? Or was this just another way to run away from his true self, another way to hide behind a performance? "I'll think about it," he said quietly, not fully committing to the idea. Sarah nodded, clearly trying to gauge his reaction. "You don't have to decide right now, but just know that you're not alone in this. You've got people who believe in you. And that includes me." As Sarah walked away, Nasher stood there, staring at the flyer for a long moment. It felt like a decision he had to make, but it wasn't just about the competition. It was about everything, the pressure, the expectations, and the person he was becoming. He didn't want to let the world define him, but at the same time, he was terrified of retreating back into his shell. That evening, after dinner, Nasher found himself alone in his room, the guitar resting on his lap. It had been a few days since the showcase, but the echo of the music still lingered in his mind. He had tried to practice since then, but it didn't feel the same. The joy, the rawness, everything that had driven him to play, had been clouded by the constant questions and doubts. He strummed the strings softly, unsure of what he was searching for. He didn't want to perform for anyone anymore. He didn't want to impress anyone. He didn't want to be the guy who had to live up to everyone else's expectations. But the question still lingered: what did he want? Who was he becoming? As the notes of the guitar drifted into the quiet of his room, the answer began to take shape. It wasn't about the performances. It wasn't about the competition. It was about something deeper, something more personal. The music was always a part of him, but it had never been about showing off or being perfect. It had always been about expression. It had always been about finding a way to speak when words weren't enough. Nasher realized then that he had been looking for validation in all the wrong places. He had been so caught up in trying to prove something to others that he had lost sight of why he had started playing music in the first place. It wasn't about winning or impressing anyone. It was about him. It was about expressing who he was, in that moment, with no need for approval or applause. With that thought, he stood up, walked over to the desk, and picked up his phone. He had been avoiding it for days, but now, it felt like the right time. He tapped out a quick message to Sarah. "I've made my decision. I'm not going to do the competition. I realized something today, I don't need to keep proving myself. Music is for me, not for anyone else." He stared at the message for a moment before hitting send. The weight that lifted off his shoulders was immediate. He wasn't saying that he was done with music. He was saying that he was done with the pressure. He was done with trying to fit into a mold that wasn't his. The decision felt freeing, as if he had finally found the freedom to be who he really was. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to chase someone else's dream for him. He could play music because it was a part of him, because it gave him joy, because it allowed him to express himself when words failed. The next morning, as Nasher walked into school, he felt lighter than he had in days. The uncertainty that had clouded his thoughts had cleared, and he realized that the true journey was not about the performances or the attention, it was about discovering who he was, outside of the expectations of others. He found Sarah in the hallway, and when she saw him, she gave him a questioning look. "Did you make a decision?" she asked. Nasher smiled. "Yeah, I did. I'm not going to do the competition. Music isn't about winning or pleasing people. It's about being true to yourself." Sarah's eyes softened, and she smiled back. "I'm proud of you, Nasher. That's a big step." As the day went on, Nasher felt a sense of peace settle within him. The attention, the pressure, the expectations, they no longer controlled him. He was free to be who he was, and that was more than enough. In the days that followed, Nasher continued to play his guitar, but it was different now. The music flowed more naturally, more freely. It was no longer about performing for an audience, it was about expressing his soul, about telling his story without fear of judgment. And as he played, he realized that the journey he had started all those months ago was only the beginning. There was still so much to discover about himself. But now, he understood that he didn't need to be perfect. He just needed to be himself. And that was more than enough.